Real quick, let me just tell you guys, as I was sitting back there and we were singing, I was encouraged because I looked over to my right and I saw all these teams sitting up here up front. And now I know what they're going to say. Matt told us we had to. No, I didn't tell them they had to. However, Wednesday night when we were in class with them, I encouraged them. I said, hey, you know what I was thinking? How cool it would be to have the front row full at church. And not because of me, but because of our Lord. Because I realized the front row in church is one of the most empty places. And I thought, well, we should fix that. And so they all sat there, and I just suggested. I said, that would be cool. It's up to you guys. You all do, of course, what you want to do. And all of them together decided to do that. Sophie was left out, apparently. No, I'm just kidding. They filled it up. That's why. So I'm just teasing her. But encourage them because I think that is really awesome to see. So, and if we run out on that side, this side, I promise Donna and Harold don't bite. At least Donna doesn't. So you guys can make it over there. And I did tease Noah. I said, you're going to miss your Nana rubbing your back during service, but I think you'll be okay. So I told him I was going to tease him about that. I will tell another funny one on them. Sunday night, they came over for the Super Bowl, as you know, and we had the big Super Bowl party. And we normally watch some halftime on because we have service. And, of course, we're not going to change service even a little bit for football if we're going to say it's the most important. So you guys got that. I don't have to explain that. And so as we're there, they decided, I've got a video. I chose not to play it on the screen because I didn't know if we had visitors and it was chaotic. However, I did send it to Shane. I think I sent it to Chad and a few other people. And they're all sitting on the couch. The game's on. They're eating snacks, that kind of thing. They're socializing. And then that's over to my right side. Well, I look over to my left side, and I see Aiden and Noah Ham, and they're putting each other in chokeholds, wrestling around on the floor. And I just take my phone, I film one side, and I go over, and I film the other side of that. And I said, we call this chokeholds and small talk, so welcome to Woodbine. And so that's what that looked like. And then all the girls go, Matt, aren't you going to stop them? I said, if someone's face turns blue, then I'll stop them. But until then, I'm going to let boys be boys. So, and I did have to stop them a few times. Say, okay, reset, take a break, take 5, get a drink of water, and just make sure that you don't hurt each other too bad. So, mine is on here. Testing, let's see. What about now? Donnie, can you hear me? Donnie, can you hear me? Oh, there we go. Okay, that's a little better. Do I need to say all that again? Okay. So chokeholds and small talk, encourage the teams, that kind of thing, if you didn't hear that. So that's what I said. Anyways, looking up here, Pumpkin Patch Faith, I know you're probably thinking, well, what is that going to mean? Well, a few weeks ago when Bobby was in the hospital, Julie actually gave me this idea, and I thought Julie's going to think I'm being rude because she gave me a sermon idea, and I was typing it down on my phone. She's going to think I'm just texting while she's trying to talk to me. I was writing a sermon, and so I jotted down a few sermon notes because we were talking about one thing that she had mentioned through all of that, which was when Jesus talks about having faith the size of, you guys know the rest, the size of a mustard seed. And so we talked about that quite a bit. And so I put on here not mustard seed faith, even though we mentioned that. I put pumpkin patch faith, and I did that for a reason. We're going to go through it. But first, what I want to do is I want to look at the verse together. And so we're going to be in Matthew chapter 17. And this is the only scripture that we're going to look at through this morning. And then we got about 6 or so verses here. And it goes on, and we just see the story kind of a little bit before the popular verse. And in verse 14 it starts, it says, when they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. Lord, have mercy on my son, he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. And so Jesus is having this moment like maybe a boss at work, like, okay, I've told them what to do. They're not doing anything right here. And so then it gets into verse 17, and Jesus, he doesn't hold back. He says, you unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you, right? Now that reminds me, I don't know if you're with me on this, but that reminds me of my dad when I just couldn't do anything right as a kid. He's like, how many times do I have to tell you? How long do I have to stick, you can't figure this out. And so my dad's great, by the way. I'm not making, he's an awesome guy. I love him very much. However, that's just one thing that comes to mind because what's happening there is now Jesus, he's getting onto them. He's saying, how long do I have to put up with you, right? So we see that they've talked about this before in some manner. And so then he says, bring the boy here to me. Bring the boy here to me. And so it reminds me almost like he is saying, if you want something done right, you what? You got to do it yourself. So he says, bring the boy here to me. Jesus rebuked the demon. It came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. So he just made this, I guess, exorcism, you could say, look pretty easy. In verse 19, it says, then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, why couldn't we drive it out? So I just picture them saying, hey, Jesus, okay, you just kind of made us look back. You come over here. Let me ask you this. Why couldn't we do that? Like you just, exorcism, boom, right there. You did it yourself. Why couldn't we do that? And then Jesus turns around, looks at them, and he replied, because you have so little faith, right? I would say Jesus is fed up. I would say he's tired. He's tired of something. And so I'm reading back, trying to figure out, have they been doing this before? Is this the first time that they didn't do what it was that Jesus needed them to do? But he says, because you have so little faith, truly I tell you, if you have faith, and here's the verse that we know, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing would be impossible for you. But I like how Jesus says that, because we think about that mustard seed. And I had with me, I forgot it. I knew I was going to forget it, and I forgot it, Chad. But I got to go to Israel years ago, and we were in Galilee. We went down to see Galilee. And on that hill leading down is mustard seed plants and mustard seeds. And so I said, you know what? To them, it's just a weed. I'm sure they wouldn't mind if I took one or two. So I went over. I took it. I took a plastic jar of pretzels with that lid. I unscrewed it. I threw all the pretzels away, and I put it in there because I knew it would protect the plant because it was fragile. And I packed it all the way home in my suitcase from the other side of the globe. And so now I've got it in a nicer case. It's not in that pretzel case anymore. I've got it in a nicer case up on my shelf. It's got the plant, it's got the seeds, and I wanted to bring it. I'll bring it tonight and next Sunday morning so you guys can see it. But I just think that mustard seed, because when we look at this verse, we often think that. If we have faith the size of a mustard seed, we can move mountains. Wait a minute, that means the goal is to have faith the size of a mustard seed, right? Well, not necessarily. But Jesus is saying if you have faith at least that size, you can move mountains. Or in other words, what he really says, and we miss this, he says, move from here to there. And I like how Jesus says that, because now he's giving direction. Right? Now there's more specifics. It's not just saying, well, the mountain will move, I don't know how it's going to move, but there's an idea in mind that it's going to move from here to there. We're going to come back to that. We're going to wrap back around to that. But oftentimes what we do is we compare our faith to that mustard seed. And if I heard that, and I would be, at least I think I would be offended if I heard someone compare my faith to that. And oftentimes we don't think that. Because what we hear is, oh, it can move mountains. That sounds like pretty great. But if we took that away, if we took the whole idea of the mountain, moving a mountain away, we set it off to the side, and someone came up to me, and I walked up to Malachi, I said, Malachi, you have faith the size of a mustard seed. Well, that's pretty smart. Or if I said, you got faith the size of a pumpkin seed, I would think he would be offended, because how big is a pumpkin seed? About that big, right? At least say the whole pumpkin, or you have like pumpkin patch faith, and that's where we get this fancy title in. You have faith the size of a pumpkin patch, right? Okay, well, that's a little bigger. You would like to hear someone say, hey, you got faith the size of a skyscraper. Okay, that sounds more like a compliment. But if I walked up and said, you have faith the size of a seed, well, thanks a lot, right? Because a seed is small, but we just read it so quickly and often forget how small that really is. And so we think, well, does Jesus offend them by saying that? Indirectly so, but he's already chewing them out at this point. So we know that he's not happy with them. He's saying you have so little faith. Your faith, if it's the size of a mustard seed, you can say to a mountain, move from here to there. Nothing's going to be impossible for you. But they still couldn't do what they were trying to do there. So if the faith the size of a mustard seed can move a mountain, how much smaller is their faith that Jesus is getting onto them? What Jesus is saying is you have almost no faith. I don't know anything much smaller than a mustard seed, right? I don't know what we could compare to. Mustard seeds are, if you've ever seen one, they're really tiny. I mean, a pumpkin seed's probably this big. A mustard seed is just like rolling around a little ball. It's the tiniest little thing. And maybe we think, well, why can't we, just like these disciples, they're trying to go about the ministry. And you think, well, why can't I win someone to Jesus? Why can't I get someone to become a Christian? Why can't I get someone to come to church, right? Now, don't get mad at me, but maybe our faith is small. Maybe we're not putting ourselves out there. Maybe we're not really trying and sticking our neck out there to do so. And I'm speaking generally this morning, but I'm also stepping on my own toes when I say this, because we see how Jesus says, how long will I put up with you? How long will I have to stay with you? In other words, you know what to do. We as Christians know what to do. We know that if we want to see somebody become a Christian, if we want to see the church grow, if we want to see people come to Christ and make that decision, we've got to go to them. We've got to make that decision ourselves to say, you know what, I'm going to have faith. I'm going to step out in faith. I'm going to stick my neck out there, and maybe I may get made fun of. Maybe I ruin my reputation for Jesus, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I can stick my neck out there. And what God wants to do is God is ready. Think of it like this. God is ready to bless the church. He's just waiting for us to be ready to do so. He's just waiting for us to stick our neck out there. He's just waiting for us to go and to take that leap. And so we see here what Jesus says. He says, move from here to there. If the mountain's going to move from here to there, what do we have to do? We at least have to be moving. We at least have to be doing something. So when he says move from here to there, the way I like to say that is when we pray about things, maybe pray in detail. Maybe pray in detail as if God's going to answer it in that way. Pray in detail about certain things. Pray for, and there's a list of examples I have, but pray for the lost in detail. Meaning pray for those who are not Christians in detail. I remember when Tammy, for those of you that know Tammy, she's just started coming here this year, but she came in one day, and I remember my prayer this morning was this. I was in the parking lot, and I'm not taking credit. I'm saying God answered the prayer. But I prayed in the parking lot. I said, God, I pray that we just see somebody become a Christian today, right? Before we walked into the building, I said, I just pray that, or someone at least makes a decision, we can get moving in that direction. And I'm standing somewhere in here. Shane's by the double doors. Tammy walks in, looks at Shane, and says, hey, who do I talk to about being baptized? And Shane goes, that guy right there. And so Shane, I guess, threw me under the bus in a good way. And so she walks up to me and goes, yeah, I want to talk about getting baptized. I was like, I looked up, I'm like, well, God, you answered that pretty fast. I mean, it's been 20 minutes. and so we talked with her, and it wasn't that day, but she did, not too long later, ended up being baptized into Christ, made that decision to become a Christian. And when we were talking beforehand, she said, you know, I want to become a Christian. I want to go to heaven, but I want my family to go too. Who doesn't want that? And she was emotional, and she said, I just want my family to go with me. I said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with you, and then we're going to start checking off your family. How about that? She's like, that sounds like a plan. So she came, and that next Sunday morning, she ended up getting baptized. We all saw it at the end of service. And then it was a few weeks later, her son Nick came up, and he said, hey, at some point I want to get baptized. I said, well, at some point? I said, why at some point? So we talked, and that evening, he ended up getting baptized. And then it wasn't too long later, her husband Jeff, I get a message from her saying that Jeff wanted to be baptized. And then I remember we went up and he got baptized. And I think here it was a Thursday evening. We met here on a Thursday evening or afternoon. It was the middle of the week. He got baptized, and Tammy's sitting right about where Jack and Brenda are. And I walked over to Tammy. I said, would you have believed when you made that decision that you'd finally see your whole family becoming a Christian? And now your whole family gets to go to heaven together. She said, I never would have thought. And then I looked at Tammy. I said, you have lived. No, I'm kidding. I didn't say that. But I said, we just have to have that type of faith. That we can look at a situation and say, okay, here we are, and there's where we want to be. But we have to have the faith to do so. And Jesus says, if you have faith even the size of a mustard seed, and that's pretty small. So you think, if we have pretty good faith, what's going to happen then? Because we see the comparison, a mustard seed, right? How small that is, but how big of an impact it can be. And if we have even greater faith. And so then we think about maybe praying in detail for the sick. Right? When we saw Bobby was sick, one thing we did was we saw, okay, this is going to be the next stage that he's going to have to go through. So what did we do? You guys remember? We put it on Facebook. We said, hey, this is the next stage. We're not at that stage. It's the next stage. But what we're going to do is we're going to pray for the next stage now. Because we're going to have faith that God's going to answer that prayer when it comes time. We're going to have faith, enough faith to say that, you know what, I believe that God is going to answer that prayer, but also that he's going to answer the prayers that we've been praying in this stage. Because think about it, if we're praying for the next stage, what does that mean? We have faith that he's going to answer the prayer for the stage that we're in right now. And so we pray for that, and now we see that he's in rehab, and Corbin's sitting up doing great, and we just keep getting better and better reports. When Jesus says, move from move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. When we pray in detail, pray in detail as if something amazing is going to happen. Right? Now you're probably thinking, okay, Matt, you're just changing the words of Jesus here, right? Because what did the devil say in the garden? He said, did God really say, right? And so I don't want you to get confused and think, okay, Matt's doing that same thing, and he's twisting up the words that Jesus says here. He says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, then you can say to this mountain, move from here and there. But again, like we said earlier, that doesn't mean that our faith can't be greater. That doesn't mean that we can't have a pumpkin faith or pumpkin size or pumpkin patch size faith or a skyscraper, whatever you want to relate it to. Because if we did, again, just imagine what would happen at that point. See, oftentimes we say that we want amazing things that happen in the church, but we've got to act as if that's going to happen. And you're probably thinking, okay, well, Matt's sermon this morning is really starting to sound like some motivational speech, right? Right, Sandy? Matt's just, like he just stopped preaching. He's just trying to motivate us or something. Rather, what I'm getting at, I'm not doing that, by the way. What I'm getting at is, I heard it said like this before, and I don't know any better way to say it. I want to see Woodbine, Kentucky, because what we as a church here in Woodbine do, I want to see Woodbine, Kentucky become the hardest place for someone to go to hell from, and the easiest place for someone to go to heaven from. Okay? Do you catch that? I can say it again. We want it to be the hardest place for people to go to hell from and the easiest place for people to go to heaven from because of what's going on in the church, because the church is coming together, because if the church sees somebody, right? If Jonah grows up and then all of a sudden, hey, Jonah stopped going to church, right? I'm just picking on Jonah. But if he does, Jonah knows full well that if he tried to do that, every one of us in here would go find Jonah wherever he is and say, hey, we're dragging you back in the church because we're not letting you go that easy. And as Christians, we should make it hard for people to go to hell and easy for people to go to heaven, because we're going to come together as the church when we're stronger together and make sure that we're going to get that person to heaven. We're going to make it easy for them to go to heaven because we're going to give them the accountability that they need. Even if they don't want it at the time, we're going to give them the accountability that they need. We're going to give them the encouragement that they need. We're going to make sure they know how to get to heaven, and we're going to make sure they know how to finish that race. And so we want Woodbine, Kentucky to be the easiest place for people to go to heaven from. But as I thought about what Jesus said there, I thought, why did he compare it to mustard seed? You ever wonder stuff like that? Like, why did it? I know one time we talked about that apple here, or the apple in the story of Adam and Eve, and I remember Donna came up and said, why do people say it's an apple? Well, and we don't know. It's not, we're not going to do a whole message on it, but we don't know. But I remember she asked that question. She said, why do you think that that's just what people say? That's how the narrative has gone. I said, you know what? I have no idea, but I think that way sometimes, right? I'm thinking like Donna, right? I'm thinking, why mustard seed? Of all the things that he could compare to, is it because it's the smallest and he wants us to think, well, if the smallest thing that he can compare it to can move mountains, then it's only uphill from there. Maybe so. I'm not sure. That's a question that I'll ask him when I get to heaven. Does anybody have a list of questions for when you get to heaven, right? I know I'm like that. I'm like, I don't know, but you know what? We're going to make that a heaven question. When people come to me and ask a question, they say, why? I say, you know what? That's a great question. I don't have the answer, but if you go to heaven with me, then we'll ask that question there. And so we'll make that the plan. But I thought if he compares it to mustard seed, and sometimes we're not seeing mountains move. Sometimes we are. But sometimes we're not. And I thought, if that's the case, then how small is our faith at times really? If it's not even doing what a mustard seed would do, and it's smaller than that. Because oftentimes the slightest thing will rock us. The slightest thing will knock us off course. The slightest thing will cause us to maybe leave the church, or maybe not even leave the church, but maybe just misprioritize God. Because there's a lot of times we'll see people will still come to church, but what happens? God's not a priority, right? And we begin to misprioritize God, and we begin to put other things before God, and we begin to put him at the very least second, which is where he should never be. And we may not say, well, you know what, I'm going to leave Christ, but we misprioritize him. And when we go from here to there, right, we look at this verse here as it ends off. From here to there, that can be exhausting. If we say that as the church that we want to see the church this year go from here to there, the in-between, that can be exhausting. We can be tired going from in between here to there. And oftentimes it's because the devil wants to stop what's going on in between. But we say, hey, as the church, maybe as an individual Christian, or as the church as a whole at Woodbine, we're here right now, and we want to be over there. As a Christian right now, as Matt, I'm here as a Christian, but I want to grow this year as a Christian, and I want to be over here, over there, but this time next year, I want to grow that much. Or maybe we just say as a church as a whole, as Woodbine, we're here right now, but as a church, we want to be over there this time next year, but it's the in-between where the devil does a lot of his work. It's that process where the devil says, okay, I'm going to try to stop this. I'm going to try to divide the church. I'm going to try to turn the church against each other. We know the devil tries to do that. Or I'm going to just take that individual. And if I can take the individual out of the race, if I can get him to stop running the race, if I can get him or her to stop fighting that fight, I don't have to worry about mountains moving because I took that person out altogether. And so in between, the devil likes to put in a lot of obstacles, and he likes to try to get us tired in many ways. But one thing I never want us to say is, well, why can't we do that? Why can't we as individual Christians go from here to there? Why can't we as a church go from here to there, whatever that goal is that we set to grow as individual Christians or to grow just as the church as a whole? I never want to say, why can't we? Right? I don't know how many football fans are here. When we watched the Super Bowl, we didn't really watch the Super Bowl. We just checked on the score. I made sure the boys weren't killing each other again, and then I looked back on the score. We didn't really watch it. But for those of you that watch football a lot, I thought of this, and there's one sport, or there's one play in football, and I'm not going to demonstrate. Don't worry. If I demonstrated, I would pull a hamstring. Noah would roll an ankle. Josh would pull an MCL again. We know how that goes. And so we had to take it down a notch when we played football at Woodbine because they got one hospital visit is enough. And so, but I know when you're playing football, and I played like flag football when I was just like little stuff, but my high school didn't have it, so I didn't play. I loved it, but I never got to play it because of school didn't have it, so I just played all the other sports. Well, in football, one thing that if you're not familiar, if you are familiar, you're thinking, Matt, why are you explaining this? It's for the people that don't know football, so just bear with me if you do. But in football, one thing that you do is when you're on your last down, you have two decisions, right? What are they? You can either go for it, or you can punt the ball, right? And I know we're going to want to make a lot of Kentucky, Tennessee jokes. We can do that after the message, okay? But one thing that oftentimes we see teams do is they punt the ball. And why do they punt the ball? Because if they're too close to the other team's end zone, and they go for it and they don't convert, then the other team gets the ball in that spot, and they're already close. And so oftentimes the natural thing to do for the team is they're going to punt the ball. Well, this one story that I looked up of Boise State, and I forget who they were playing. It was college football. And Boise State, they were in the Fiesta Bowl. I don't keep up with college football enough, but I know some of you guys do. And so it's like it's a Fiesta Bowl. And so they're in this game, and I want to say it's a championship, I'm not sure. And they are down by 7 points at the very end of the game. They come down, they score a touchdown 6, so they're down by 1. They can kick an extra point, and they can tie the game, go to overtime, try their luck then. Or, keep in mind, in football, you have the option, right, JP? You have the option to go for 2. But that's harder. That's not as easy. And when you are about to tie the game to go to overtime in a playoff game, you don't try to go for 2. That's just not something you do. Well, the coach decided, you know what? I'm going to go for 2. We're going to try it. But if they miss it, what happens? They lose the game, right? And so they decide, you know what, we're going to go for it. And guess what happened? They got it. You see, oftentimes as a church, we don't want to do that. Oftentimes we want to play safe. We'll say, we'll just get through this year, we'll just get through this Sunday, we'll just get through this month, whatever it is. And we get into this mindset, well, we're just going to punt it. We're just going to take the easy way out. Because when we try to go from here to there, what's the devil going to do? He's going to fight us. He's going to try to get it in a way. And so my challenge to us this morning is, as the individual Christian and as the church even as a whole, is to try to go for it. I want to win this person to Christ. I'm going to go for it. Who knows what happens? But right now, we're not getting anywhere. I want to try to get more people to come to church. I want to see my family member, right? Family members are hard to win to Christ. But I'm going to go for it. I'm going to try it. because that person may just end up in heaven with us one day. Will you pray with me?